Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Mead Made, and welcome back to another video. Today we are diving into Cura, and I'm going to show you all of the settings that I change and look at when I am in Cura for my 3D prints. And these settings are settings that you should be looking at too. So before we get started, I just wanted to show you what version of Cura that I'm actually running, because sometimes versions change and they get rid of settings or add settings. And right now I am in 5.3.0. Now, a lot of the settings, they have been in Cura for a long time for the ones that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So this should be pretty good for you. Every single time I get started with a 3D model that I'm wanting to print, there's a few things that I think about and do before I even bring in my model to Cura. The first thing is file format. I make sure that I have the right file format because sometimes I've even downloaded 3D files and it's not even a file format that Cura recognizes. So first you want to make sure you have an STL, an OBJ, or a 3MF. Those are the main file types that Cura will accept, so make sure you got that. So the next thing I'm always doing is, since I have multiple printers, I'm always clicking here to make sure that I have the right printer that I want to print to. And you just click this drop down and you can select whatever printers you have. I've already got my Ender 3 Pro, so I am good here. The next thing, if I have actually changed out my nozzle size, I want to change this first because I do not want to forget that I have a different nozzle size. And that is right here under nozzle size. So that is a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. And right here is where you can just change to any different size that you want. One more thing I'm always looking at to make sure I am on the right material setting, because this will kind of set me up in my settings over here a little better. Now, PLA generic is what I always use when I'm using PLA, and that's including for PLA plus. It's just PLA. So once I have my model in here, before I even get into my settings, I want to make sure I've got my orientations right, my scale, all of my modifiers up here. So I'm going to go, and I actually want this Hulk to be pretty big. So I'm going to go to, let's say 140. There we go. I want him all the way. This is going to be a big guy. So then the other thing, when I am actually scaling this up, I like to have them at a 45-degree angle, so they're not just perpendicular to the actual build plate. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate that. And there we go. And that is looking good. And also I'm going to right click and make sure he's centered. So he is, which is great. So now I have got Hulk all set up. Now, this is supposed to be a support-free model, even though I can see some of these overhangs. And this is some of those things that we're going to have to see at the very end. This video, I am really going to be covering all of the custom settings. I'm actually not going to be getting into the basic settings, because I've already done a video for beginners showing you every single thing that you need to know when it comes to the basics of Cura. So I am going to assume that you already have watched that video, or you already have a certain level of knowledge when it comes to working in the advanced settings in Cura. So if you haven't seen that video and you have not used any of the custom settings in Cura, why don't you click on over here and watch this video. But for those of you that already live in those custom settings, this is going to be your video for sure. So let's go ahead and jump into Cura. So starting out, you might actually have your recommended settings up, but to switch over to your custom settings, all you have to do is click this button right here. Now we've got all of the custom settings when it comes to Cura. There is another layer here that we're going to have to change. So if you look here, if we drop down, and let's just say Infill. Right now you can see there's only 2 settings, and that is not right. So if you're only seeing a few settings, all you have to do is come up here to this hamburger icon, and that means you're probably in basic. And we want to go to all. And that is going to show us every single thing in all of the menus. So if you've been in Cura for a while, or if you're still pretty new in Cura and just starting to tool around with these custom settings, there's a really nice feature that Cura offers. And that is kind of an alert to you when you're putting in settings. So let me show you that. If you look here, all of these numbers are all nice and grayed out. Like there's just no color on them. But If I am typing in something, let's say something like this, my layer height at a 3.5, that's kind of out of the specifications for the nozzle that I'm printing with. And it turned yellow. And what that is Cura is telling you, hey, this is a minor issue that may affect your print quality. And when you see that, it doesn't always mean that you need to change it, because it just might be a little bit out of those specifications. And if you see here, if I change to a 0.3 millimeter layer height, I'm perfectly fine, because that's right there in the specifications of the nozzle that I'm using. But on the other side of that, if I have literally no layer height here, you see how it's red? This is actually telling me, hey, you have a major problem that your print will not print. And if I actually go to slice this when I have a red box, it'll say unable to slice. So you gotta make sure that you have no red in any of your settings, because that means you're way out of specifications and this will not physically print. So another nice little feature that Cura will show you every single setting that you've actually changed. And they do that by showing you this blue little circle with an arrow. And if you click this button, it will automatically reset it to your print profile setting that it's supposed to be. So if you can see that there's like a bunch of arrows here, that means these are things that I've actually changed. And if I don't want them to be like that, I can just hit these little arrows and it will go right back to the settings that it's supposed to be. So just keep that in mind while we're going through this process. So now that I have my model on my build plate and I have it scaled up how I wanted, rotated and oriented the right way, now I'm ready to get into my settings. Now the first thing I always do when it comes to what I change is I have to think about what the actual model is for. Am I prototyping something? Is this for a paint job? Like I want something that's going to be really nice for a model? Or is this something that's just like a little doodad or something like that, that I really don't care if there's a bad quality. I just want it printed. Functional prints, typically you don't care about quality that much. So those are the things that I think about first before I even get into my settings. Now for this print, obviously it's a Hulk. He has to look beautiful and I want him to be clean and smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this as nice as I can. So my layer height is going to be a lot smaller. So let's get into the quality tab and let me show you what I look at for every single 3D print. First, I'm going to go here to layer height. When it comes to the layer height, this is all about quality. Now, I want this model to look nice. So I am actually going to print this at a 0.08 millimeter layer height because I don't want to see very many layer lines when it comes to this print. The initial layer height, that is the other one. Now, you gotta have a nice thick layer of filament for that very first layer. That way, we're going to get really good adhesion. So the other thing in quality that I look at is my line width, specifically my outer walls, because I bring the outer wall, the most outer wall, I bring that down just a little bit, and I'll show you where to change that. So right here is my outer wall line width, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a 0.3. I drop that down and make it a thinner wall because this is going to give just a little more detail to this 3D print. And that's pretty much everything that I look at when it comes to the quality tab. Now we've got to look into our walls because there's a few important settings that I'm always changing. So now that we're done with quality, let's go ahead and close that, and I'm going to bring up walls. Now when it comes to your walls, you can either change your wall thickness or your wall count. Personally, I like to go by wall count. So I'm going to change my settings to 4 walls. So you might be thinking 4 walls is a bit much. It's like, I usually only print 2 or 3, and yeah, I typically will print about 3 walls. But for this model, for how big it is, and with those overhangs of that arm, I want to have 4 walls to be able to have a nice thick layer while it's moving up and it has something to really bond to. Because remember, I made my outer wall even thinner, so it is actually not the full thickness of the other walls, so it's going to have less to bond to. A little more walls is a little more filament, and I get that, but this is one of those things that I really like to just increase the wall thickness to be able to get really smooth prints. The next thing is right here, optimize wall printing order, and always have this checked. and I go inside to outside. And what that means is we're going to be printing the inside walls first and then the outer wall very last. And the next one I'm going to check is alternate extra wall. And I'm going to go ahead and check that. Now, what alternate extra wall means is every other layer, it's printing another wall. And the best part about this is we're going to have 5 walls total every other layer. But what we're going to have is an incredible adhesion between the infill and the walls. Because when it's printing every other wall, in between there, the infill is going right into the next wall. So what this is doing is it's giving an amazing bond between your infill and your shell. And I mean, it creates great prints because they make them even stronger. And I just like to do this because I'm not going to be using supports for this model, and I want it to be strong because it's going to be big. And then down here on minimum wall width, now I just set mine to 0.3. And if you see right here, this is out of specification. So I want to be able to print this at a 0.3. It needs to be able to go down to 0.3 because with my quality right here, I made it a 0.3. Now, if you see here, if I would have made this, say, a 5, okay, and then I come down here and go back to the original settings, everything would be perfectly fine. This was warning me saying do not print anything lower than 0.34, but I want to print a 0.3, so I'm going to type in 3. Everything's fine up here, because what Cura's doing right here is like, whoa, I'm only going to print down to a 0.34, and you have way up there a 0.3. So all I'm going to do is tell Cura, no, listen to what I said, I am good here. Sometimes you just got to tell Cura what's up. And we're printing at a 0.3. I've had enough. That's it. So the last thing I look at when we're looking at our actual wall settings, and that is Z-seam alignment. Now, there are a bunch of settings here that you can go random, you can do sharpest corner. So I've already sliced this and everything, and we're looking at the back of the foot right here. Now, you see all these white dots. This is actually the position where the nozzle moves up and starts printing the next layer. And this is really important, especially if you're printing very smooth things, because you can get some really harsh looking lines. And what I want is I want to be able to tell Cura where I want this to be. Because if you look here on the very front, we're going to be able to see all of these little dots right here. Like, sometimes, depending on how your printer is printing, it'll show up and you'll see every one of these. So you can see all of these white lines on the very front of the model, and you might actually see this when it actually 3D prints. So we want to actually hide these, because I don't know about you, but personally, I don't turn my models around and only show the back up on the shelf. Like, I show them from the front, and if people take them down and look at them, okay, but 90% of the time when people are looking at your stuff, they're up on a shelf and they don't see the back, unless you have a mirror, like a classy mirror behind it, and then so you can see it, but I don't. So let me show you how to change that. So I like to actually go by user specified, and then I click the back. An important thing here too, let's go to the very top view. So looking at a top view here, you have to have your model actually facing the front of the build plate. And the front of the build plate is when you're clicking your very top setting right here, the bottom right here is your front, this is the back of your build plate. And if you click your 3/4 view, you can also see this is the front, this is the back. Because if I have this rotated around and I choose back, it's still going to do the very front of him. And he is facing to the front, so this is actually the back of the build plate, and I won't see these seams. So I just let Cura have the default of where that back is being located. I want it to kind of just figure it out, because I am going to be using smart hiding. There's a bunch of different hidings that you can use, and its smart hiding basically tries to find positions to where you're not going to be able to see that little jump up. So now let's get into our top and bottom settings. So a few of the things that I usually do is for the top surface skin layers, I will typically ask for 2 layers and use a concentric pattern. When it comes to the top and bottom thickness, it really just depends on the model. I know we've got a little bit of a yellow right here because that isn't really falling into play with the initial layer height and the layer height that I have. So it's a little confused, but it'll be fine because those two actually affect what your top and bottom thickness numbers are. And you can actually see here in the little pop-up box, it's affected by initial layer height and layer height, just like I said. So when it comes to our top thickness, I want to be able to have about 4 different layers for my layer height. I sometimes will go 5. The more you put, the smoother your top will be. Now, this will not get rid of some of that stair stepping you have on like the domes and peaks of things, but it'll make sure I don't have any gaps or holes in the actual top parts of the model. Now, when it comes to bottom layers, I go 5 because I like to have 5 bottom layers to be able to get a nice solid piece of plastic to be able to have the best adhesion possible for my 3D print. Now, the other thing that I will typically do if I'm having stringing issues, like if I'm using a filament that has a little bit of a stringing issue, I will enable ironing, and I will go ahead and do that. And what I'll do is I will use concentric ironing, and I just leave the settings as they are because they are really good settings and they're tuned in pretty well. So, but ironing is one of those things that can really help if you're actually having stringing issues. I'm not really having stringing issues, but I am just going to leave ironing because it does make your tops of those areas look really nice. And what ironing is, for those of you that don't know, it basically takes the nozzle when it's retracting and wipes along the actual model itself, like the inner walls or the actual infill, to be able to get that plastic from not actually oozing and causing those strings. So ironing can be really nice to get rid of stringing. But the other thing is when you have flat surfaces, it can really make your 3D prints look really smooth because of it coasting over top of it to smooth it out. Now that's all I do with walls. Now when it comes to infill, this is the big thing. There are so many different infill patterns and it's like, what do I use? What's the best one? What's the strongest one? There's a lot. But I'll show you a couple of the best ones that I like and some of the really good settings that you can tweak with your infill settings to be able to get some really awesome results. All right, so let's open our infill settings. Now, first and foremost is our infill density. When it comes to a big thing like this, I don't want to have it at 20% because, I mean, it's going to take a lot of filament. So, like, let me slice this and even just show you. So, if we look here, I've already got this thing sliced, and I'm going to go down and see my infill density at 20%, and that's a lot of infill. And if we see here, it's using 297 grams of filament. Now, for me, personally, I would probably be printing something like this, maybe a 10% infill. Now let's slice it and see how much filament we're going to save. So now you can see that we sliced it at a 10% infill, and honestly, for what we're going to be doing, this would be just fine for 3D printing. And as you can see, this is 217 grams. So we saved 80 grams of filament, and that's quite a bit. So I always am trying to figure out what is the best infill I can use. Now, cubic is probably not the one I would be using for a model. Now, for a model like this, I would probably be printing, I would say, at 15% density, and I would be using lightning. And when I slice that, that's going to save me even more. But if I was using cubic, I would be definitely using about a 10% infill just to save that infill. But lightning is great because you can have it really dense at the top and it's barely using any filament to create that. So now with lightning, it's only using 163 grams of filament. So we're saving 54 grams of filament, and we increased the density by 5% because that was at 10%. And you can see here, moving up here, this is what it's doing. I only really need some supports at the very top. So here it is, and it's creating all of those supports exactly where I need them. So lightning is definitely where I like to go when printing models that I'm going to be painting that don't need a lot of support or they don't need a lot of strength to them. But having that thicker outer shell will definitely give me that strength that I need to be able to at least paint this. All right, real quick, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to all of these amazing people supporting me on Patreon this month. If you want to be like these awesome people, you'll get exclusive access to my private Discord servers where we talk about everything. 3D printing, painting 3D prints, and even sharing our fails. But it's a great community. You can also get access to all of my behind-the-scenes content where I show you what I'm working on, and you can even have the opportunity to vote on the videos that I make. This video right here was what was voted on for this month. They want some more Cura tutorials, and guess what? Here they are. If you're interested, I'll leave a link below. Other than that, let's get back to the video. Now, the one thing I will say, if you are actually wanting some strength in your 3D print, and you're not just making something to set on a shelf that strength doesn't matter, there's one setting in here that I always check because it makes my prints even stronger. So let me show you that. So cubic is a really good three-dimensional infill that is strong. And one thing that I always check is connect infill lines. Now let me show you what it does. So now that we have that sliced, and if I come down here to some of these walls, so here's a zoomed in view of the infill and how it's actually printing. Now when I click on connect infill lines, this is actually making my infill one continuous line. So if you see here, this comes up and it moves over and along the path of the wall to bond onto that wall, and then it moves out. And you can see how this actually does this in multiple areas. So this is actually causing my prints to be even stronger. And I know some of you might be thinking, like, why do you need them so strong? I just like to have a solid print, and I do know that this makes my quality look great because I'm not worrying about the structural integrity of my 3D prints because they are bonded together beautifully. Now, if I go up one layer, you can see right here that I've got my outside, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's got that extra wall. Now you can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 wall lines, and now this is actually printing over those extra wall lines we had from the previous layer. So you can see how these just keep sandwiching together and bonding this wall and this infill together. That is an amazing setting when you're using connect infill lines. When you have that setting and this one, alternate extra wall in your wall settings, this is going to make the bonding between those two amazing and make them super strong. Now there's one more setting that I like to change in the infills, and that is your minimum infill area. And what this is it will not use infill and just fill it all in for those really small cracks. So like say if we have fingers, and it's just basically making like a little hole in it. I'm like, what's the point? Let's just make those things stronger. Because if they're solid plastic, they're less likely to break. So let me show you how to change that. Now, right here we have our minimum infill area, and this is in square millimeters. So just like a square foot, it's 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter. So that's X, Y, and Z. So it's got to be kind of high to be able to do certain things. Now, if we slice this as it is right now, so now that we're zoomed into these fingers, you can see that it's just printing some random supports in there, and they're not very big holes. So let's go ahead and add our minimum infill area. And let's just keep this at, say, 50 millimeters squared. So if it's an area smaller than that, it's just going to fill it in completely. Now let's see what this looks like sliced. All right, so with our minimum infill area, you can now see that it's going to be printing this hand, but once it starts getting to these smaller areas of the finger, it's just filling them in. So this is just going to make some really nice, strong fingers, so there's no potential for breaking. Now, this setting is especially great when, say, you have a character that might be holding a sword, and that way you don't have to worry. Like, it's going to just fill it in solid and create that really strong, instead of having some, like, hollow pockets in there, because maybe your model doesn't have a very high infill density, and you're just going to see a line or two. So using this setting is something that I use all of the time, and I always look at my model to see, do I want to mess with this? So now that we've gone over our infill, let's go into our material settings. When it comes to the material settings, this is where we control all of the temperatures for our print bed and for our nozzle while we're actually printing. Now, I will say, this is the one area I don't mess with. I don't mess with it because I set it to one temperature and that's what it works at, because I print temperature towers. These are calibration tests that you should be printing too. I print this every single time I get a new type of filament because I don't know how my printer is going to react to that filament. I have made other videos explaining how temperature towers work, and I'll put a link above for you so you can go check out how to actually do that. But the big thing here, a temperature tower. So when it comes to our material settings, this is what tells us what our settings are. So now let's talk about our speed settings. And I mean, this is the most controversial thing, I think, is like, how fast can I print? And I am always like, slow down. I understand some of you out there want to print literally as fast as you can, and you tell me that you get great quality. And if you do, great. But my quality is amazing in my print settings, and I print slower than most because I let the printer do its job. I don't have one of those new printers that can print like wicked fast. I have like a $100 Ender 3, and it's not really meant to print like crazy fast. Could I modify it? Yes, but I don't. I just let it go because I do other things, and I don't need to have something like within 8 hours. That being said, let me get into it and show you the things that I look at every single time. So when it comes to your print speed, this is your overall print speed. For 3D models, I typically keep my print speed about 50 because it's going fast enough that I can print it pretty quickly, but it's also slow enough to where I know I'm getting good quality. Now, there's also the infill speed. Sometimes I will crank this up to 60, and that is perfectly fine, but you want to do this within reason. You don't want to actually increase this like crazy, because then you can get some layer shifting and other effects that you don't want if you increase this too high. And also, you have the potential for clogged nozzles, if I didn't mention that. The wall speed and outer wall speeds, all of these are actually half of what your print speed is. So if you want to actually print these faster, you can. But my wall speed, I keep at 25. I like that speed because it gives me really nice, clean, smooth surfaces. Now, the travel speed is usually at 150, and I like it at 150 because anything faster than 150, I've had some issues where the nozzle will knock into the print and then it'll break it off the bed. 150 is fine. Now, my initial layer speed. This is the part that everybody should be paying attention to. This is the thing that I will print anything between, okay, here we go. I will typically go about a 15 millimeter layer speed for my initial layer speed only. And this is only for my first 2 layers. I will do this because my bed adhesion is amazing. It never pops off. And I'm not kidding. I don't have bed adhesion issues ever. I mean ever. I have usually support issues or something like that because I go crazy slow on the first 2 layers always because I want that to be the most perfect filament path laid down on my bed as possible. So if you give it enough time, that flow will give it enough squish. You will have the most beautiful, smooth first layer ever. So if you're not going to listen to me about any of the other speed stuff, that's fine. But this one, come on. You got to give me something here. You got to do this. But anything between 15 and 20 millimeters a second, you're going to be great. Don't speed up your first layer. Your first layer is the most important one. And if you have a 20-hour print and you rush that first layer and at hour 23, it just pops off because you didn't get that good squish, don't say I didn't warn you. And just like I was saying, number of slower layers, that is 2. That means that these layers are going to be the slowest, and then we're going to just jump right back up to the numbers that we have up here. All right, so that's everything that I do for speed. All right, so the next thing we have is our travel. And first thing we have is retraction. So retraction is that magical little thing that actually will help you with your stringing. If you have any stringing on your 3D prints, it actually pulls back the filament off of the nozzle. It pulls it out of it. And then when it moves to the other part or the other layer, it pushes the filament back. So you don't actually have that oozing of filament when it's moving around. And that stringing is actually what's happening. It's just oozing filament out when it's not supposed to. So let me show you how I change it. So enable retraction, you have to have this checked. And then I also retract at layer change. This actually helps with those zits or little blobs that you can sometimes get on your 3D prints. Now for me, my retraction distance, I know my magic number for the filament I use and my printer is 5. Now, I strongly recommend you doing a stringing test if you're having stringing issues. And I've actually already done a video talking about that and how to do that, and I'll go ahead and put a link for it right up here somewhere for you. Now, my retraction speeds and everything like that, I just leave these all of the default settings. But the only other things that I always look at to make sure that are checked is I have retract before outer wall. I always have this checked because before it goes on the outside wall, I want to make sure it's retracted and it's not going to ooze on the outside walls. Then avoid printed parts when traveling. This is very helpful. So if it's jumping between parts, it's not going to just jump right through a part, and possibly the nozzle could hit that and knock it off your build plate. So avoiding parts is always good when traveling. And also the same thing, avoid supports when traveling, because supports, we all know that those can get knocked down way easier. So this little box right here can kind of save you a lot of headache. Now the last thing that I always do is when it's retracting, it's doing a Z-hop. And what that is doing is it's actually just lifting it up off of the part. So Z-hop only over printed parts, or Z-hop just when retracted. And I am doing it just when retracted. And the Z-hop height is 2 millimeters. And that's just enough. So it'll lift up off of your part and then it can move over. So those are the only things that I look at in the travel settings. Now let's go to the cooling settings, which are vitally important. So the first thing we want to do is enable print cooling. And if this box isn't checked, we definitely want to check it because the fans will actually turn on and help cool your prints. And this is especially good for you if you have overhangs or anything with bridges, because this will cool down the filament so it will harden and you won't get any droops or sags. So you want to have that checked. The fan speed, at least for me with PLA, I have it 100%. I want this fan speed at 100%. I want it full blast the entire time. The only thing that I am making sure of is my initial fan speed is at 0%. And those are the only things that I ever look at and double check when it comes to cooling. All of the defaults in Cura are pretty solid. Now, minimizing that, the next one is supports. And if you have supports on your model, you will just check this. Now, when it comes to supports, there are so many settings and it is so difficult to master. And I've already created another series just talking about supports. And I'll go ahead and put a link to that up here for you. But the big thing is They can be frustrating, but the new tree supports in Cura are working really nice for me, and I'm hoping to come up with an updated video in the future because I'm still testing them out and trying to get everything just right with them before I teach you. But we're going to go ahead and skip over supports, unfortunately, and then we're going to get down into build plate adhesion. So let me show you that. So build plate adhesion is fantastic. If you need to have a little more adhesion to your bed. Now, the one thing that I do, if I'm not actually needing more adhesion to my bed, I will print a skirt. And what a skirt really does is give you that opportunity to make those minor adjustments to properly level your bed and get your adhesion perfect. Because if you have to manually level your bed, a skirt is a lifesaver. Now, let me show you some of the things that we can do to be able to aid us in doing some of those fine-tune adjustments as it's running. Now, when it comes to your skirt line count, I like something around a 5 because this is going to give me 5 passes. And when it comes to distance, a 10 millimeters is really good for you. So let's slice this and let me show you what we get from that. So you can see here this ring all the way around the model, and it's not touching the model because this does not help you with your actual adhesion. This is all about giving you the opportunity to see if your model is perfectly level. And so you can see here, if we play through, you can see that it's going to print those 5 rings all the way around the model. And it follows the contours of your 3D print. But I also have it set at 10 millimeters away. And this really gives you a good idea. Is my nozzle too close to the bed on this side, or is it too close on this side? And what this allows is while it's printing, you can just mess with your knobs and just try to fine tune it and level that perfectly. Because sometimes you can level your bed and it still is just a little bit off. And I mean, I'm turning it like a little bit just to see. Now, skirts are something that can definitely help you if you need to just do some little fine-tuned tweaking. But if you're having problems with adhesion just period, a brim is something that can really help you. Because what brims do is it actually increases the surface tension by increasing the actual first layer of your 3D print. So let me show you that. So I just got to go to my drop-down menu here and click brim. So when it comes to your brim width, you can actually just mess with the actual width in millimeters or just the line count. And remember that this is the line width. So a 0.4 millimeter nozzle will give you a 0.4 millimeter line width. So we would get 20 of those lines. So if you see here, I could type 15. Then this would gray out and it's just going to give 15. But let's go back to 20. Now let's slice this so you can see what it does. So here we are, and we're just going to play through, and you can see what this does. It will actually create 20 rings around your actual model, and then it'll print the other one. So wherever there's something contacting the surface of your build plate, it will actually print that first. Then it'll fill in the actual model itself. So you can see here, this is going to be all one solid sheet for your first layer. But if we move up, you're going to see that that's it. It's just for that first layer. And you're going to be able to get even more surface tension because now it's a wider base to be able to really grab on to your build plate and hold it for your model. Now, the one thing I will say, you are going to have to take some kind of sharp tool and just cut around the edges to peel this off. Sometimes it just peels right off. But most of the time, there's a few pieces that are stuck too well together, and that was the whole point, to be able to stick to your model and get that tension. But it's really easy, because it's literally just one sheet, one layer line thickness. So just take an X-Acto knife or something like that, and just cut it right off. Now, sometimes people have real bad issues with warping, and what warping is where, like, the corner starts to peel up, and you're like, man, now you gotta, like, putty it or something like that, or sometimes you have to reprint it. A really good solution for that is using a raft, and let me show you that. Now, all we have to do is just go to the drop-down menu again and click raft. Now, let me go ahead and slice this just so we can see what a raft really is. So now that we've got this sliced down, you can see these little platforms it's actually 3D printing on. And if we go all the way to our first layer, so if we zoom in here, you can see that it actually prints this really thick first layer and with gaps in between it. But if we go up to our next layer, it prints a middle layer, which is a little tighter together, and it's still thick, but not as thick. But if we go up to the next one, you can see that it's actually printing a smoother surface. And then the final smooth surface is going to be printed. And this is your top. Every raft has a top, middle, and bottom section. And now it's going to actually print our first layer of our 3D print. Now if we zoom in here, we can see that there is a gap in between here, and this is the air gap. So you can see that it's not actually printing on the raft. It's actually allowing it to fall down and just lay on top of it. And the next few layers are overcompensated for that. So you can actually get some really nice results by using rafts, because this is giving you a really thick base to be able to get some good adhesion to, and then it's creating this nice surface for your model to actually print to. Which means if you've been having warping issues, like it's peeling up off the bed, but if it's printing on PLA or the other filament you're using, there's less likelihood for that peeling to occur. So if you're having those issues, a raft is a really good solution for you. Now those are all of the main settings that I'm always looking at. Now there's always fine-tuning and adjusting depending on a model, but for the most part, those are your main ones that you always want to be looking at and checking. Now let's say that you get your print profile just set beautifully, and you've got all of your settings how you want them, and you're printing a bunch of the same types of things. What you want to do is save that profile. And let me show you how you can save your custom settings to make your own custom profile. So the great thing is all you have to do is come up here to this little save disk, and we're going to click that. We're going to click right here on this dialog box and click Save as New Custom Profile. So I'm going to name this Mead's Figure Profile. And then once I've got that, all I have to do is click Save New Profile. So now you can see right up here, the profile I'm on is Mead's Figure Profile. So for my figures that I'm going to be painting, this is the settings that I want to use. Now, if I drop down, I can actually change this to say my other settings, like I have a super quality profile, and I can switch to that. Or I can just switch back. This is super handy if you have like a bunch of different things that you're printing and you have different profiles for each one. So you can have as many as you really want. So now that we have everything set, the last thing that I always do when I'm actually getting something ready to 3D print is I double check it. This is the most crucial part. This is where you can find a lot of those failed prints before they even happen. So let's just jump over here and let me show you the things that I look at. So once I have it sliced, I go into my preview, and I am going to first go all the way down. I look at the very first layer first. So I like to have skirts. So I have got my skirt, I know it's there, and then I'm looking to see if it's flat on the build plate, which it is. I've got a really good first layer of these feet. Then I'm going to just slowly start going up. And what I'm really going to be looking for is those overhangs. I want to see where it shoots out really far, like right here. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to look at it. I'm like, okay, so this might have a little bit of droopage on it, but the next layers really start to move out and it will be okay. So I know I might have something I need to fix there. But I'm okay with fixing little things here and there. But I'm just going to keep going all the way up and watching my model. And I'm looking at each side until they connect. So everything's nice and smooth. There's nothing too crazy. And how this is coming out is pretty good. Like, I don't have to really worry about this. So far, it's a pretty good support free. Now, where this starts to connect is really what I want to see. So it's connecting really well. So the artist that did this did a pretty good job at it. So now I'm going to just keep going up and keep looking. I'm also looking for those little white dots. Now, if the white dots are in the back, I'm happy. And look, there they are. So I am good with that. I want all of those seams in the very back of my model. So I'm just going to keep going up through. And I'm going to look at this arm and see how this is actually printing. So I can see it's starting to come out, and it's going out little by little, which is still pretty good. There's enough structure there to where I'm not too worried about needing any kind of supports on this. So I'm just going to keep going up and looking how this is going to slice. And all the fingers are doing good. And let me just check this last bit of the fist. And all of my infill is really coming in and giving the support where I actually need it. And it's looking fantastic. Even this thumb right here is something that I might look at, because it's coming out pretty far. So I would just kind of go layer by layer. And then also this spot right here. I'm just looking at it and making sure. And it looks like it's bonding together, and it's going to have a pretty easy print right there. So I'm good with all of this. Now we've looked at our first layer. We have made sure that all of those overhangs are supported enough and they're not just going out in the middle of nowhere really far. And this is where you can really see that little scrub, like scrubbing through it really slowly. You can see like, oh wait, his elbow's down. Like there's an island there. I need supports. This is where you can catch this stuff. I mean, this is crucial. Like, you need to take the time and really scrub through it and look at it, because this is like a 2-day print. And do I want it to be a day and a half in and then it gets to the arm and then it just fails? No. So look at this. It's worth the time. Now that we've done that, we're ready to save this. So all we do is I save this to my SD card, take the G code, and then put it in my 3D printer, and I am ready to print. So that's it. I've shown you all of the things that I check every single time that I'm 3D printing a model. When I'm in Cura, those are the settings that I'm looking at, and now those are the settings that you need to be looking at. But now you also can be able to save those profiles. Once you get your settings just beautiful, you'll have those custom profiles and you can just switch to them and print beautifully. But remember, I always want you to just scrub through your model after you've sliced it to make sure that everything is still okay. Before we go, I just wanted to remind you I have a free YouTube community Discord server, and that is where we can talk about everything 3D printing and painting 3D prints. So if you have questions, feel free to leave them below or jump on the Discord server and ask me there. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link below for you. Other than that, I wish you a great day, and I'll go ahead and I'll see you in this next video right here.